Hi there, and welcome to Master of Horror, where I bring you the scariest, true paranormal stories that I've ever come by. True scary paranormal story number 1, Emmanuel the Ghost. So after a whole decade of bearing this story inside of me, I finally decided to say it. I know other people would like to hear this story, but I also need to hear someone else's take on it and get a different perspective of what had happened. So here goes. In the late fall of 2009, I was driving my friends home after a night of beer and bowling. I was a designated driver, and I was super sober. We were driving down the back roads to avoid roadwork on the highways and driving through small residential areas that had lots of open patches of farmland. Less than a mile from the first stop, where I would be dropping off one of my friends, I spotted something on the side of the road. I applied the brakes and slowed down. In the pitch darkness was a kid, a young boy just wandering down the road all by himself. He looked about 8 or 9 years old. I pulled off the side of the road and quickly got out of the car and walked over to him. When he saw me coming, he just nervously stared at me like a kitten would that's in a cage at a pet store. It was evident that he had been crying. I told him my name and asked him if he was all right and why he was out here and where he was going at this time at night. He was wearing a red shirt that was 2 sizes too big for him, green shorts and flip-flops. It was probably very cold though. He was doing a great job of not showing it. After a while of hesitating, he said his name was Emmanuel and he had run away from home and he had gotten lost and couldn't find his way back. He spoke in a kind of scary low whisper, like he was worried about what he should say. I pulled out my cell phone and asked him for his parents' number so I could call them, and he claimed he couldn't remember it. Then my drunk friends that were in the car started screaming for me to hurry up and get back in the car. My buddy that was in the front seat got out of the car to take a piss in the weeds. So I told Emmanuel to jump in the passenger seat, and I told my drunk friend who got out of the car to climb in the back with the other guys. I closed the passenger door and walked over to the driver's seat, but I did not tell Emmanuel to put his seatbelt on because I didn't want to scare him or make him think that we're trying to abduct him. I just wanted him to remain calm. I started up the car and we started driving. All my intoxicated drunk friends were all awkwardly introducing themselves from the back seat, but Emmanuel just stared ahead at the dashboard and ignored them. I noticed after a few moments Emmanuel started crying again. I couldn't tell if they were tears of pain or fear. I just said, "Are you all right, man?" He nodded and let out a tiny hiccup. I told him that there were some fast food napkins under the seat, and he reached down and used one to wipe his tears. I considered calling the cops, but one of my drunken friends was underage, and you know how that goes. The police would be more interested in him than the kid. He said his house was another 10 minutes from here. I had to drop off 2 of my friends, and the last friend fell asleep in the back seat. I finally left the residential streets and got back on the main road. I drove for a few minutes before finding the street. I asked the kid how long he had been walking, and he replied, "A very long time." I was kicking myself for not offering the kid any food or water. I didn't have any in the car, but I could have definitely stopped somewhere. I finally pulled into the cul-de-sac and drove to the very last house. It was kind of tucked away behind some trees. I pulled into the driveway, but before I could even park the car, the kid opened the door and hopped out and said, "Thanks." I remember thinking that his voice sounded so much more cheerful and calm than it had been before. He ran towards the house, where there was absolutely no lights on, and he waved to me once he got to the front porch. I leaned over to pull the passenger door shut and was surprised to find the handle was icy cold to the touch. Not so cold that it was unpleasant, but cold enough to catch my attention. When I looked back up, Emmanuel was gone, and I hadn't heard the door shut. No lights came on inside the house either. I waited for another 5 minutes, but my friend snoring in the back reminded me I needed to get him home. After I dropped off my last friend, I parked my car and decided to call the police just to do a welfare check on the kid. I gave the operator the address. She informed me that no one lived there. I told her what had happened and asked her to please have a cop go over there to check on the kid. It was already past 2 in the morning. When I pulled into the driveway, 2 cop cars were already there, waiting for me. They said they had swept the entire property and checked inside the house, but there was no one. I finally contacted a private investigator friend of mine, and she informed me that several years prior to the place being abandoned, another family had lived there in the house who had lost a son in a freak accident. He had been killed while riding his bike on the side of the road, and it was the same exact spot I had found Emmanuel walking. She told me his name was Charlie, but his middle name started with an E. I felt like I had swallowed wet cement, because my insides were all heavy. To this day, I refused to believe that I encountered anything paranormal. The boy on the side of the road looked solid, with real flesh and bone. How could he even be a ghost? I drove by the same spot where I found him, just to get a look at the place during daylight. After waiting in my car for a few moments, I drove off. I hadn't made it 15 feet when I caught a glimpse of a boy in a red polo shirt in my rearview mirror. I slammed on the brakes and I jumped from the car to look around, but there was nothing there. There are so many nights that I have stared up at the ceiling in the dark, wondering if that boy was really a lost soul. Upon returning home, he was unable to find his family. For those of you who believe or not in these things, what do you think? What can I do to be able to sleep peacefully at night?
Scary, true. Paranormal story number 2. The church entity.
My name is Lana, and I'm finally ready to talk about what happened to me in the summer of 2019. I had just turned 16 that November, and I was ecstatic. I could finally get my driver's license, and that was my first step to freedom. After my birthday had passed, the summer finally came around. In the summer, there were plenty of camps I could have attended. The one that I finally set my mind on was called United Methodist Camp. Basically, what you would do was you went for a week Sunday through Saturday, and during that time you worked all day building things, usually wheelchair ramps for the elderly or disabled. It was generally a fun experience until Wednesday rolled around, the day we started the unusual waking up at 6 a.m. At 11, all the teams including mine would head out and start on the wheelchair ramps. We usually were able to finish a ramp in about 2 days. So Wednesday was my team's second day working on this particular ramp. We finished up at around 3 in the afternoon. So my counselors and the rest of my team headed back to the church that we were staying at. I should probably clarify the living situation. The boys stayed in a separate building and the girls stayed in the basement of the church. I'm not sure about the boys' rooms, but the girls were put into a room down in the basement that was originally used as a Sunday school classroom. There were 2 pictures hanging on the wall of Mary and a picture of Jesus. That Wednesday night, we all laid down to go to sleep. There was a girl named Sydney who was laying down across the room, and she started saying things like, "We should tell scary stories." We all asked her to go to sleep. Sydney proceeded to knock on the wall behind her, saying, "What if we get a knock back from the other side of the wall?" After about 5 minutes, the room was dead silent. We all figured that Sydney had passed out, so one by one, we all drifted off to sleep. I was laying on the opposite side of the room from Sydney, and I was facing the pictures of Mary and Jesus. After everyone had fallen asleep, I was still awake, just laying there in silence. Finally, my eyes became very heavy, and I laid my head down on the blow-up mattress. Suddenly, I heard this tiny knock coming from the wall behind us. The knock was quiet enough for only me to hear, but just loud enough to wake me out of my tired state. I then looked at the pictures that faced me on the other side of the room. I then sat up in bed in a state of terror. What I saw will forever haunt me to this day. I saw a tall, faceless figure leaning down, staring at me. The thing was so tall it had to bend its extremely skinny neck to look at me with its featureless face. I was frozen in fear. I couldn't move or scream. The figure started to bend its neck down towards me. What felt like an eternity of laying there watching this freakish thing move closer to me. A light flashed in the room from someone's phone, and it snapped me out of my trance. I jumped to my feet and dove into the bed of one of my friends. I stayed there with her for the rest of the night with my head under the covers. I cried until I finally passed out from exhaustion. When I woke up that morning, I acted everything was normal. I was terrified about what I saw, but if I said anything to anyone, they would have thought that I was going nuts, so I kept it to myself. My counselor kept asking me if it was okay. She told me later on that she caught me staring off into space and silently crying throughout the day, which I have no memory of. I really wish this was the end of the story, but to my dismay, it is not. When night came, the girls had gotten into a fight about something, and this resulted in their moving into different rooms. My best friend Milani and myself were the only ones left in the room with the pictures. I was absolutely terrified to go to sleep in the room again, since it was just me and only one other person. As we were settling down for the night, my youth director, Rose, who was a close friend of ours, walked into our room and talked to us for a while. Suddenly, we heard an ear-piercing scream echo through the basement. It came from one of the other rooms the girls had moved into. The three of us rushed into the hallway to see what was happening. The girls ran out of the room and were absolutely hysterical. One of them grabbed me and said, "He's here, the devil's here." I then made my way into the room that the girls had just fled, and I felt a dark presence lurking there. When I looked to the corner of the room, I could see the same dark figure that I had saw the night before. I then turned around and left the room as quickly as I could. One of the girls were finally able to tell us that something had grabbed one of them, and a moaning sound could be heard in the room. I'm not sure if the girls actually saw something, but I put two and two together and concluded that there was something evil residing within that church. And that night it showed itself to me for some unknown reason.